Have you ever woken up with the unsettling feeling that someone is watching you from beneath your bed? Have you ever walked down a hallway at night and heard the sound of breathing coming from behind the door you swear you've never opened? And what would you do if one day the thing following you was the forgotten part of your own soul? Welcome back to Whisper Horror Channel, the storytelling channel for those brave enough to listen to things that shouldn't be heard. If you're listening late at night, make sure your door is locked, lights off, and don't let anyone, or anything, stand behind you right now. Don't forget to leave a comment, like the video, and subscribe to follow more chilling stories. Now, let's head down to the basement, where someone is still waiting to be remembered. The first chill of November arrived at the same time as Rachel's moving truck. It slipped past layers of thick clothing, curling over the back of her neck like a silent warning. The house stood there, perched atop a short, lonely hill, surrounded by a thicket of bare-limbed trees. They stretched their jagged fingers into the grey sky, like hands clinging to the last weak rays of a dying day. Rachel had found this place online, drawn in by words like quiet, private, and a space for healing. But standing before it now, the silence felt different. It was not the peaceful quiet of a refuge, but the emptiness of a place long forgotten. Two burly movers began carrying cardboard boxes inside, their footsteps echoing strangely against the wooden floor, breaking the hush that might have ruled this house for ages. Rachel followed, feeling like an intruder trespassing on someone else's territory. The air inside was thick with the scent of time, old wood, dust, and something else, a faint, musty odor seeping from corners untouched by light. The sun's final, feeble rays tried to pierce grimy window panes, only managing to reveal millions of lazy dust motes suspended in the air, tiny ghosts, silent witnesses to everything that had happened between these walls. The boxes stacked in the living room looked like a row of cardboard tombs, filled with shattered relics of a life she no longer recognized. Rachel Peterson, a name she knew belonged to her, yet felt as distant as a character in someone else's novel. They told her she'd been an ace editor, a sharp, up-and-coming investigative journalist in Boston. There was evidence in old folders, notebooks scrawled in hurried handwriting, even journalism awards meticulously wrapped for the move. But looking at them, she felt nothing. No pride, no nostalgia, only a frigid distance. A complete disconnect. It was as if she was a visitor at her own life's museum, reading placards for artifacts she couldn't remember. The incident. That was the neat, sanitized word doctors, therapists, and family used to package the horror that tore her life apart. It was a curtain, hiding the brutal truth of what had happened, a truth no one wanted her to remember. The incident didn't just snatch away her career, it stole her very self, leaving a new Rachel, flawed, struggling to anchor herself in every waking moment. Its worst legacy was doubt, a toxic seed that took root deep in her mind and sent tendrils through her consciousness. She doubted her memory, her senses, her own sanity. Nothing watered the poisonous vine faster than hearing, "You must be remembering it wrong." That phrase, whether spoken in kindness or impatience, was devastating. Every time she heard it, the floor beneath her seemed to tremble. It was the world's way of declaring her brain, a tool she'd once trusted, was now a traitor. It turned ordinary conversations into tense tests. An old friend recalled a college memory, and she could only nod and fake a smile. Panic rising as no matching recollection surfaced. At a family dinner, someone retold a joke from last year, and she had to fake laughter, her mind lost in fog. To survive in that uncertainty, Rachel built herself a fortress of rituals and repetition. Her world ran on a pocket-sized, Black leather notebook. Everything was written down. Tomorrow's schedule planned to the minute. To-do tasks mapped and ticked, brushing her teeth, checking email, appointments, names, and crucial details, diligently noted. That book was her external memory, her only tangible defense against the chaos inside. It didn't stop there. Her obsession with control spilled into the physical. Before leaving any room, she snapped a photo on her phone, the work desk. Pen perfectly parallel to the edge, the bed. Blanket folded just so, the kitchen counter. Pristine and empty. These images were anchor points, irrefutable proof that everything was as it should be. Before bed, she performed a 15-minute ritual. Main door, locked 3 times, handle yanked 3 times. Windows, all latches down. Curtains closed. Stove, knobs checked. Everyone at off. She did this nightly. Step by step. Like a priest performing sacred rites. Because she knew, one slip, one unexplained shift, a chair out of place, a book to the wrong page, might send her spinning. Was it her? Or was something else tampering with her world? That question was too terrifying to face. 3 days after moving in, the house was still a maze of unopened boxes. Rachel spent those days fortifying her defenses. She walked every room, cleaning, organizing essentials. Most crucially, memorizing their place. 14 steps to the 2nd floor, the 3rd step creaked. She learned how the living room light shifted at sundown. She tried to transform this strange place into something familiar. Something she could control. But there was one place still out of reach. The basement door. She'd noticed it on day 1. Tucked in a nearly hidden nook at the end of a short hallway behind the stairs. Unlike every cream-colored door in the house, this one was raw wood, dark, rough-grained, marred with old scratches and dents. It was barred by a heavy iron brace, fastened with rusted screws. At its heart, a large, tarnished brass lock whose color had faded to green. The real estate agent mentioned offhand that the basement hadn't been used in decades. Its key long lost. Just storage down there. He'd waved it off. Nothing to worry about. But Rachel did worry. She was strangely drawn to it. Every time she passed, her eyes flicked its way. Something about its utter ceiling unsettled her. Why lock up a space that was just for storage? Her old journalist's instinct, though buried under fog, whispered that locked doors always hide secrets. That night, a sudden winter storm struck. The wind howled through the house's cracks, like someone keening. Rain lashed the windows, tapping strange rhythms. Curled up under her blanket, Rachel couldn't get warm. The house's usual hush was replaced by nature's chaotic symphony. She felt more uneasy than ever. She took her prescribed sedatives. But tonight, they didn't work. Her mind spun, wide awake in a way that was almost frightening. She closed her eyes, willing herself to sleep, and she drifted off. Not into peace, but into a place of broken memories that weren't her own. Darkness. Thick. Absolute. She couldn't tell if her eyes were open or closed. The air was tight. Suffocating. The pungent scent of damp earth filled her lungs, making her nausea rise. Hands and feet pinned. Immobile. Muddy coldness clinging everywhere. Panic exploded. She tried to scream, but only a strangled gasp escaped. And then, she heard it. A sound outside her cramped prison. A scratching, soft at first, then growing, frantic, desperate. Nails clawing wood. Rachel jolted awake. Her throat was dry. Her heart pounded in her chest like a trapped bird. But it wasn't the fear from her dream she noticed first. It was the cold, a raw, alien chill. running up from the soles of her feet. Not the wood floor's chill, the chill of stone. She opened her eyes. Not her bedroom. Nearly complete darkness. It took seconds for her eyes to adjust and see blurry shapes. She was downstairs, and she was standing. A shiver ran down her spine. Slowly, she looked down. In the faint light from the living room windows, she saw her bare feet, pale against the dark floor, dusted with damp, grey-black earth. Stuck between her toes, the very dirt from her dream. The panic she felt in her sleep now erupted, overwhelming and real. She gasped, struggling for air. Where was she? Why was she here? She looked around, trying to get her bearings, and then her heart almost stopped. She was standing in front of the basement door, right there, just an arm's length away. Silent and menacing in the darkness, iron bar and rusted lock taunting her. No memory of leaving her bed, no memory of going down 14 stairs, no memory of crossing the cold living room. Her memory, once again, a vast emptiness, a page torn out violently. Panic demanded to take over. But another part, some remnant of the old, tenacious journalist, rose up. Calm. Analyze, look for evidence. That inner voice she hadn't heard in so long. She forced her trembling legs to move. First, to the front door. She flicked on the hall light, squinting at its brightness. The lock, still secure. She'd locked it 3 times before bed. She yanked the handle, didn't budge. She checked the back door. Same. Every downstairs window latched tight from the inside. No sign of forced entry. No one else in the house, which left only one explanation, a terrifying one. She brought herself here. Some unconscious part of her. Slowly, Rachel returned to the dark hallway. The basement door waiting. Now, it wasn't just an inanimate object. It was a symbol, a gate to the darkest, most lost part of her mind. A question she was afraid to answer. What was behind that door that some part of her was obsessed with? Even in sleep, she raised a shaking hand, hesitating before pressing her palm against the rough, cold wood. And instantly, she felt it. Not her imagination. It was real. A subtle vibration. A faint rhythm, pulsing from the grain into her skin, not caused by the storm or the house. It had its own pattern, its own tempo, as if something on the other side was breathing, waiting, or both. Rachel stood frozen in the dark, palm on wood, feeling that horrific cadence. For the first time since she moved in, she realized, the house's silence was not emptiness, it was holding its breath. Rachel didn't go back to bed. She stood, motionless in the cold hallway, palm pressed tight to the basement door, as though letting go would erase the only proof of what she'd just felt. The delicate tremor was gone, but its echo lingered on her skin, a supernatural aftertaste, a pulse of life from a place that should be filled only with death and forgetting. Her rational mind, the reporter, the skeptic, screamed for logical explanations. The storm, drafts through old foundation cracks, pipes trembling as temperatures shifted, maybe even a muscle spasm from stress. Anything but what her primal instincts whispered, that something alive was on the other side. She forced herself to let go. Her palm, icy. She glanced at it, half expecting a mark, a freeze burn. But there was nothing, only pale skin and familiar lines. She stepped back once, twice, never taking her eyes off the door. As if it were a predator crouched in the darkness. She spun and all but ran to her bedroom, heart pounding. She dove under the covers, childish. But it was all she could do. Sleep never came. The storm kept raging. But now, every sound had new meaning. Branches scraping the roof, or the claws of something desperate. Wind howling through window frames, or moaning wraiths Floorboards creaking, no longer just structure, but unseen footsteps. The house was no longer refuge. It was a living thing, and she was trapped inside its body. She lay there, listening, until the first grey light of dawn leaked through the drapes, signaling the end of a nightmarish vigil. The next day, Rachel clung to normalcy as if her life depended on it. Routine was her fortress, her only defense against chaos. She woke on time, made coffee, and opened her black notebook. 7 a.m. Wake up. 7:15, coffee. 7:30, check emails. 8 o'clock to 12 o'clock, manuscript edits. 12 o'clock, lunch. She read and reread her schedule, the tidy script a sharp contrast to the turmoil in her mind. Determined to banish the ghost of last night, she filled the house with life, noise, activity, her own mark. A bright pop playlist blared. Happy, careless lyrics shook the heavy silence. She unpacked the last boxes. Books on shelves. Clothes hung up. Photos placed on the mantle, one item at a time. Staking her claim. Turning the house into her house. Mid-morning, while rearranging the kitchen, she spilled a box of cereal. Thousands of flakes scattered on the floor. She crouched to clean, and her eyes, at floor level, drifted toward the hallway and the basement door. In daylight, it looked harmless, just an old, dark slab of wood. A relic. Nothing scary, nothing unusual. The need to double-check tugged at her. She wiped her hands on her jeans and approached, each step slower than the last as doubt crept in. She stopped before the door, took a deep breath, pressed her palm to the wood. Nothing, absolutely nothing. Only rough, cold wood. No vibration, no rhythm, no life. Relief and embarrassment crashed over her together. Relief that she'd been wrong, shame that she'd let her imagination run wild. See? Her mind mocked. You did it again. Your brain is screwing with you. Everything is fine. You're just stressed. She stood a long time, eyes closed, feeling nothing but utter stillness. She must be wrong. It had to be. She needed to relax, maybe go for a walk, get fresh air. But as she turned away, a tiny, almost trivial detail caught her eye. On the floor, right at the base of the door, a thin scrape in the thick dust. Fresh, clean, as if something had been dragged across it. Next to it, jagged slivers. Something she hadn't noticed in the dark. A few tiny shards that looked like broken fingernails. Relief vanished, replaced by a bone-deep chill. That night, she could no longer ignore it. She performed her evening security ritual by rote, then climbed into bed. No intention to sleep. She turned out all the lights, letting darkness fill the room. She lay still, holding her breath, listening. At first, all she heard was her heartbeat and the faint whir of the bedside clock. And then, it started. Not vibration this time, but sound. A real, physical sound. So faint she wondered if she imagined it. Right on the edge of hearing, easy to miss if you weren't seeking it. Not the house creaking, not wind. It had a rhythm. Slow, steady, unmistakably alive. Breathing, not clean. Normal breathing. Wet and broken, like air struggling through lungs filled with water. A damp, heavy, ragged breath. Ha. Long pause. Shh. Ha. Long pause. Shh. Rachel froze. Body rigid. The sound seemed to crawl through the floors and walls, straight into her skull. She covered her ears, but it was inside her head. She sat up, panic mounting. She needed to find its source. Remembered logic, old heater, pipes. She crept out of bed. Floor icy. Examined the heater vent, only weak airflow. Listened at the pipes in the bathroom, Silence pressed her ear to walls. Moving slowly, nothing but in the hallway. The sound was clearer. It was from downstairs. Her heart thumped, loud as drums. As she descended the stairs, trying to keep silent, each stair creaked. She flinched, afraid she'd been discovered. At the bottom, no doubt, it was coming from one place. The basement door. Regular, sick, an organic heartbeat in the stillness. Ha-sh, ha-sh, a sign of life. But life in a place that shouldn't have it. Fear mingled with morbid curiosity. She was repelled, but also drawn. Nights that followed turned into psychological torture. The breathing became a nightly presence, unwelcome, constant. It started after sunset, stopped only with the dawn. Her sleep was shredded. She caught 1, maybe 2 hours before being jolted awake by that hideous sound. By day, she drifted through her house, a ghost. Hollow-eyed, shoulders slumped with exhaustion. Lack of sleep wrecked everything. Missed therapy calls, stupid editing errors. Her notebook, once precious, forgotten on the kitchen table. Her rituals collapsed. She had no energy left for her fortress. Doubt clawed deeper. Maybe it was all in her head. Maybe the trauma finally snapped her sanity. She needed proof. One night, she grabbed her phone, set it to record, and crept down the stairs. She stopped a few feet from the basement door, too scared to get closer. She pointed the mic, stood in darkness for nearly 20 minutes. Blue screen glow lighting her pale face. The breathing continued, relentless. She pressed stop, hurried to her room, slammed the door, sat on her bed, heart pounding, plugged in her earbuds, and hit play. Silence. She scrolled back and forth, maxed the volume until harsh static stung her ears. Nothing. No breathing. Only faint house noises, the creak as she moved. Cold despair crushed Rachel. So it was true, it was only in her head. A 32-year-old woman plagued by auditory hallucinations. No monster behind the door. The monster lived in her mind. The loneliness was total. She couldn't tell anyone. They'd call her crazy. They'd give her that pitiful look and say, "You must be remembering it wrong." But even when her mind surrendered, something instinctual resisted. The sound was real, too detailed, too persistent. Journalistic instinct sparked in the ashes of her despair. If she couldn't investigate the thing, she'd investigate explanations for it. She opened her laptop, fingers trembling. Strange noises in old house. Stress, auditory hallucinations. Infrasound phenomenon. Sick house syndrome. She devoured dozens of articles, hundreds of forum posts. She read about wind through old beams creating human-like sounds, about the brain's tendency to seek patterns, turning random noise into voices or breathing, auditory pareidolia, about hypnagogic hallucinations, sensory events when drifting to sleep. Each scientific theory was a life raft. So that's it. Maybe infrasound from a distant factory. Maybe it really is a hallucination. She clung to these theories. They brought her fleeting control. But deep down she knew they didn't fit. Infrasound didn't explain why the sound was in a single spot. Hallucinations couldn't explain its consistent, complex rhythm. Then, everything changed. The seventh night. After a week of this torment, exhaustion turned into something else. Anger, cold, desperate rage. She couldn't live like this. Couldn't let a sound, real or imagined, destroy her. She leapt from bed. No more tiptoeing. She stomped down the stairs, each step a challenge. She halted before the basement door. The breathing was there, unyielding. Something inside Rachel snapped. All her fear and frustration exploded. "What are you?" she screamed. Voice hoarse and shaky, her shout echoing through the empty house, sounding distant and mad. "Leave me alone." She stood there, breath ragged, tears streaming down. She'd faced it. She'd spoken to it, and then it stopped. Not gradually, instantly, cut off in mid-breath. As if someone hit mute. Silence crashed down, but it was different this time. Not empty. A silence thick with waiting. A silence deliberate. A silence that knew how to listen. Rachel froze. Her rage instantly crushed by a wave of terror 100 times greater. Before, it was just a phenomenon. A noise. Now, it had responded. It acknowledged her. Simply by being silent. It knew she was there. She backed away. Hand clamped to her mouth. Stifling sobs. She ran, not to her bedroom, but out the front door, fumbling open locks, rushing into the cold night in thin pajamas. She didn't care. She just had to escape. She stood on soggy grass, shivering with cold and terror, staring back at her house. In the moonlight, it looked like a giant skull, windows dark, hollow eye sockets. The breathing never returned that night, nor the next. The house returned to its original silence. But for Rachel, this wasn't freedom. It was a threat. Silence now terrified her more than sound, because it meant whatever it was waiting. It had changed strategy. It had her attention. Rachel knew she couldn't run. She couldn't sell the house and leave, because the monster she had to face wasn't just behind a basement door. It lurked in the forgotten shadows of her own past. Science wouldn't explain it. She couldn't ignore it. She had to confront it. The next step wasn't to listen anymore. The next step was to look, and that meant she had to find a way to open that door. Silence descended on the house, thick and heavy as a winter quilt. It wasn't the peaceful hush of those first days, but a deliberate, listening silence, drawn tense and vibrating with invisible energy. Rachel huddled outside on the damp grass in her thin pajamas. Yet she felt nothing. Every shred of her attention was riveted on the house. Under the pallid moonlight, it no longer resembled a refuge. It was a sentient predator, crouched and waiting for the prey to move again. Finally, when cold had seeped into her very bones, Rachel forced herself inside. Locking the door felt pointless now. Whatever she wanted to shut out was already within. She didn't return to her room. She slept on the living room sofa, all the lights blazing, shadows leaping in every corner. But she never slept, listening instead to the silence and striving to decode its meaning. The next morning brought a shift within Rachel. Fear was still there, a chilling, persistent current beneath the surface, but now, something new had crystallized atop it: resolve. The rage of the night before, though born of despair, had given her the thinnest taste of agency. She had screamed into the darkness, and the darkness had answered with silence. That meant she wasn't powerless. She opened her black notebook, no longer for mundane schedules. In bold capitals, she wrote, "Incidents at the house." Below, she recorded every event meticulously, as if drafting a crime report. Day X+3, woke up before the basement door. Feet streaked with damp earth. No memory of moving. Day X+4 to X+9, heard a wet, wheezing breath from the basement door. Only at night. Day X+9, recorded audio, nothing abnormal captured. Checked possible sources, furnace, pipes, nothing matched. Day X+10. Circa 2:15 am, verbally confronted it. Sound stopped instantly. Heavy silence fell. Reading her entries, she saw a logic both terrifying and clear. These were not random events, but an escalating chain. The silence was the next move, and she realized she was in a chess match with something unseen that had just made its play. Now it was her turn. Days passed in taut, nervous quiet. Rachel moved through the house lightly, senses sharp as live wires. She catalogued every sound, and gradually, Silence became corrosive in a new way, gnawing at her reason, making her question if this had all been imagination. Almost. She believed it. Almost. Until a week after the confrontation, Rachel noticed something amiss when she came downstairs. The air in the living room stood oddly charged. Nothing looked different, books in place, remote on the coffee table, photographs on the mantel, but something was wrong. The armchair, a heavy, moss green velvet relic she'd bought from an antiques shop, so unwieldy she'd struggled just to push it into its favored corner by the window. Now, it was sitting in the middle of the room. It had been dragged physically, 3 meters, then rotated to face the dark hall and the basement door. Like a front row spectator awaiting some spectacle, Rachel nearly collapsed from the vertigo of it. This wasn't some accidentally turned page or errant pencil. It was deliberate, heavy, and, crucially, beyond her strength alone. Her first instinct was terror, an intruder. Racing. She checked every lock and window. All secure. Nothing disturbed. The house was a sealed fortress. So, how? She approached the chair as if nearing a wild animal. Circling it. Examining from every angle, nothing. But its new positioning proclaimed a message: I am here. I can touch your world. Her gaze was drawn to the basement door. The dark brass handle, which she remembered having polished only days before, now bore a smudge. As Rachel neared, it became clear, a tiny handprint, made not from oil or dust, but from damp, dark earth, the same earth that had stained her feet. Heart racing, stomach twisting, Rachel recognized what she was staring at: proof. She had wanted evidence, and here it was. Undeniable and material, a physical mark of the impossible. I'm not crazy. The words thundered in her mind, not as comfort, but like a battle cry. If she wasn't mad, then what was happening was real, investigatable. At that moment, a new Rachel emerged, not the patient, not the doubter, but the journalist. Sharp-eyed and relentless. Fear, now, was her fuel. She retrieved her long-forgotten camera, assembled the macro lens and tripod, and transformed her living room into a crime scene. She photographed the chair and its place in the room, then the handprint, placing a small ruler for scale, an old investigative habit. She left the print unwiped. It was Exhibit A. Sitting at the table with her laptop and notebook, she divided her investigation into 2 leads. First, land history. Rachel dove into digital archives, public databases, local history forums, her skills returning fast. The house was only 5 years old, built by a developer. Before then, the land, along with others in the area, belonged to the Blackwood family since the late 1800s. Old survey maps revealed it had once been a marshy hollow near a creek, with no buildings ever recorded. Bland, unremarkable, a blank slate. Frustrated, she scoured old newspapers. Nothing, only bland society items and family milestones. No scandal, tragedy, or disappearances. Dead end. Maybe her narrative was wrong. Maybe it wasn't about the Blackwood ghost. The clue was earth, the same damp soil as before. Maybe whatever this was didn't come from the old house, but was part of the land itself, and inextricably tied to her. Second, herself. Holding her breath, she searched for Rachel Peterson Boston journalist accident. Article after article, all bland. Careful, award-winning journalist Rachel Peterson seriously injured in a car accident, recovering, family requests privacy. A managed story, with missing specifics, a professional wall of silence. There should have been more, police reports, accident photos, other names. She dug deeper, using alternate names. Her old station, Keywords like investigation, threatened, and she found it, a single comment on a deleted forum about silenced journalists. Written anonymously, "What about Rachel Peterson? Everyone says car accident. But I don't buy it. She was working on something big. Last anyone saw her, she was off to meet a source for secret documents, not on a highway. In a deserted construction site outside town." Rachel's heart hammered. A remote construction site. She searched the developer's name and project plus her accident year. The top hit, an old press release announcing the Willow Creek Estates project, right where her house stood. Addresses matched. The first and second lines of inquiry crashed together at a single terrifying point, where she was sitting. Her accident had happened here. She hadn't moved into a haunted house. She had moved into her own crime scene. The entity in the house, moving the chair, leaving handprints, breathing at her door. It wasn't a stranger. It knew her. Maybe it was part of what happened. As she sat frozen, laptop open, horror swirling between past and present, a new sound broke the heavy silence. Not breathing, not a shriek, but tap, tap, tap. From upstairs, the measured bounce of a small ball. Like a child at play. Tap, tap, tap. Each sound hammered her nerves. It called to her, leading her onward. Rachel rose, limbs leaden, and headed for the stairs. In the black upstairs hallway, the bouncing stopped the instant her foot hit the first creaking step. Silence returned, now charged with new intent. It knew she was coming. The first stair groaned under Rachel's weight. The sound cut through the complete silence that had just fallen. The ball stopped the moment her foot touched the wood. It was a response, not a coincidence. The silence was now more eloquent than sound, a conscious pause. The house itself holding its breath as the prey neared the trap. She froze, torn between primal survival, run, don't go up there, and the clinical curiosity of her resurrected journalist's will. She had passed the point of no return. She knew too much to feign ignorance, too little to ever rest again. Truth, no matter how ghastly, was better than the fog of lies. She climbed the stairs, step by slow, cautious step, fists clenched, eyes locked on the darkness above. At the top, silence pressed in, oppressive and absolute. No ball, no ghostly child. The emptiness of the corridor, the expectation of something that wasn't there, was, somehow, more chilling than any apparition. She was about to retreat when something on the dusty floor caught her eye, a faint, damp mark. She knelt, a single, impossibly small barefoot print in dark earth, smaller even than the tiny handprint before. Then another, and another, forming a pathway across the hall, directly to the door of the spare room, where she'd stored all the unopened moving boxes. Rachel followed. Inside, the chaos was organized, boxes stacked to the ceiling, labeled in her handwriting, books, winter clothes, kitchenware. The small footprints continued between the stacks, pausing at a single grey plastic file box in the far corner. Dust thickened, labeled Rachel, work. She recognized it, dimly. It had followed her from Boston, packed away by family after the incident. She squeezed through, knelt in front of it, and unclipped the stiff latches. The snap sounded like a bone breaking. Inside, the smell of old paper, ink, magnetic tape, the scent of a newsroom, carefully organized notebooks, expired press badges, labeled cassette tapes, and at the bottom, thickened beige, bound with red string and labeled in faded type, investigative project, the mysterious disappearance of journalist Rachel Peterson. Time stopped. Her mind rebelled at the contradiction, reading her own missing persons file, written in her own hand, It was as surreal as seeing her obituary in the morning paper. She forced open the cord and read, subject, Rachel Peterson, 32, senior editor, Social Affairs Unit, Boston Channel 7. Status, missing. Last seen 9 p.m. October 22nd. Year 10-5. Background, in final stages of a 6-month investigation into Northlight Properties, allegations of corruption, money laundering, and organized crime. Believed city contracts were obtained through bribery. Last known events, arranged to meet an internal source for critical files. Meeting location, Willow Creek Estates construction site. Never returned to office or home. Car found abandoned 15 miles away next morning. No evident foul play. Construction site. The anonymous forum comment. The past looping to the present. Impossibly and undeniably. She read more. Breathless interviews. Phone threats. The mounting paranoia, and the thrill of closing in on the truth. It was like reading the diary of someone already dead. Pieces of her memory began to stir, not images, but sensations, the cold night air, stench of fresh earth and wet cement, the sound of gravel underfoot, a stranger's voice in the dark, until the final, nearly blank page. Trembling script, not documents. It's a trap. And then pain, blinding, skull-cracking pain at her neck. A wet thud. Darkness rushing in. Mud against her cheek. She screamed, hurling the file away. Body shaking with panic and clarity. The final truth had returned. She hadn't merely disappeared. She'd been murdered, and buried at that construction site. Her world shattered. Family, friends, doctors, all had orchestrated the lie of a car accident to spare her, or themselves, from a truth too horrific. Brain damaged and amnesiac. She'd bought it. She had lived 5 years as the protagonist of someone else's script. But, who was she now? If Rachel died that night, what remained? A ghost? A soul that clawed back into an empty shell? Or a miraculous survivor, escaped from her own grave? Mind wiped clean, then. In the pit of chaos, something deeper dawned. The earth marks, the bouncing ball, the handprint, the breathing, the vibration, every sign, every haunting. They weren't the work of a stranger or demon. They were her. The part of Rachel lost that night. Memory, identity, soul, buried with her body under the cold ground. Trapped, while the rest staggered on. This was no haunting, it was a cry for help. The breathing was a message. The marks were proof. The bouncing ball, an echo of stolen childhood, a guide. Every sign, a call out of her own grave. Not to haunt, but to rescue. Two halves of a broken soul, sundered by trauma and amnesia, fighting to be reunited. Her panic drained away, replaced by an icy, painful clarity. She was no longer a frightened victim, nor a woman with a haunted house. She was a journalist with the greatest case of her life, the murder of herself. Rachel rose on trembling but steadier legs. No longer did she view her old boxes with fear, they were evidence. She looked down at the file, Exhibit A. She knew what had to happen next. There was only one answer, one conclusion. The place that held her body. The place that held what was left of her. She stepped from the room, down the stairs, through the now meaningless living room, and stopped in the dark hall. She stood before the basement door. It waited, not a symbol of dread, but now a destination. Rachel pressed her palm to the rough wood. This time, no vibration pulsed beneath her skin. She no longer needed it. She finally knew who was waiting on the other side. I'm coming, she thought, not in fear, but with a vow. Wait for me. Rachel stood before the basement door. The air in the hallway was so thick and still she could hear the surge of blood in her own ears. This was no longer a confrontation with the unknown, it was an appointment. An appointment with herself. With the memory and soul buried beneath the cold ground of this house. The dark wooden door, reinforced with a rusted iron bar and discolored brass lock, was no longer a symbol of fear. It was a gravestone. And she had come to exhume it. She had dragged the sledgehammer from the tool shed. The steel head cold and heavy. Its wooden handle smooth and solid in her grip. This was no longer a tool for building, it was a key. A weapon against the lies that had imprisoned her for 5 years. Fear hummed through her. But it was overwhelmed by something stronger, resolve. She was no longer a trembling victim in the dark. She was a journalist hunting for her final answer. A survivor ready to reclaim all that had been stolen. She inhaled deeply. The scent of dust and old wood filling her chest. She lifted the hammer, feeling its weight, and for one moment closed her eyes. I'm coming, she promised in her mind to the ghost that bore her own face. Wait for me. The first blow struck, not at the lock, but straight into the iron bar. Metal crashed on metal, shattering the silence like a gunshot. The bar trembled but held. Her hands numbed from the shock. She knew it wouldn't be easy. This entity had been sealed away too long. The lie reinforced again and again. She stepped back and swung again. This time even harder. Sparks flickered from the impact point. The iron bar bent slightly. She could hear the old screws groaning, each swing. Rachel poured in rage, fear, and despair. Each strike a condemnation. Clang, for the lies. Clang, for the stolen memories. Clang, for you must be remembering it wrong. Sweat trickled from her brow. Her breath grew ragged, mixed with the ruthless rhythm of the hammer. The metallic smell spread in the air. She stopped thinking, she only acted. Her body a machine built for one purpose, destruction. The bar surrendered. It bent into a V, pulling cracks through the wood around it. Dust rained from the door with every blow. Now the lock. Solid brass. Stubborn. Chonk. The hammer glanced off, scoring deep into the wood and sending splinters into her hand. She felt no pain. Physical pain was nothing compared to the torture of her mind. She braced herself and struck true. Chonk. A sharp crack, part of the lock's casing split open. Gears exposed. Chonk. A shard flew across her cheek. Crash. With a final shatter, the lock broke apart. The iron bar hung pitifully. Now, only the old hinges and interior latch held the door closed. Rachel let the hammer drop. The metal rang harshly on the wood floor in the sudden silence. She panted. Hands braced on her knees. Her chest heaved. Palms raw and bloody, but she had breached the outer defenses. She straightened. Her hand on the battered wood. She pushed gently. The door didn't budge. The interior latch held fast. A dry, almost desperate laugh escaped her. Of course it wouldn't be that easy. She picked up the hammer again. This time she aimed for precision, breaking the wood near the handle, chipping piece by piece. A rough opening forming, big enough for her hand. Just as she reached in, a tiny, unexpected click came from within, and the door slowly, softly, opened itself. Just a hand's width. But it opened, as though the entity beyond, seeing her resolve, had chosen to help her finish. As if saying, "You're ready. Come in." Rachel froze. The anger and strength drained away, replaced by a chill so absolute it nearly stopped her heart. So long as the door was closed, she was in control. Now, standing before the abyss, she was not. A breath of air rushed through the opening. Cold, stagnant, and unmistakable. The smell of wet earth after heavy rain. Of an abandoned basement. Of rotting roots. Beneath these, something sweet and sickly, decay. the scent of time imprisoned, the smell of a grave, the smell of her past, the smell of herself. Rachel lingered at the threshold, centuries passing in a few heartbeats. She knew, once she stepped through, she could never return. There would be no turning back from the truth. She abandoned hesitation. She shoved the door open. It moaned. Hinges rusted, revealing a solid wall of darkness, a mouth waiting to swallow her. Shadow pressed in, dense as ink. She fetched the heavy-duty flashlight from the living room, flicked it on. A cold white beam sliced into the dark. It illuminated a steep wooden staircase, no rail, thick with dust and webs, unused for decades. She stood at the top, cast her light down. She could not see the bottom. She drew one last breath, air from the grave flooding her lungs, stepped onto the first stair. Creak. The sound rang huge in the silence. A sound of invasion, a violation of a place forgotten. Second step. Creak. She descended, step by careful step, sucked down into the earth. The light from the hall shrank behind her, then vanished around a bend. Now, the world was only the trembling circle of light, and endless darkness pressing from all sides. The air grew colder, wetter, damp crept through her clothes. The walls were naked stone, rough, dripping. Droplets gleamed black in the beam. She heard water dripping somewhere, a slow, relentless rhythm, like a clock winding down. She heard her own heartbeat, pounding drums warning of terror to come. At last her foot pressed something soft. Not concrete, not wood, earth. She stood in the basement. She stood in a grave. Rachel swept the flashlight around. It was a small room, perhaps the size of her living room. The floor, wet, uneven earth, rough stone walls. Overhead, rusty pipes and dense webs. No old furniture, no boxes, nothing, just emptiness. A strange wave of disappointment crept in. Maybe she had been wrong? Maybe it was all a story, the product of a broken brain? Maybe nothing had ever been here. And that's when the flashlight beam caught it. In the corner, there, a patch of earth distinct from the rest, while the rest was tightly packed. This was softer, looser, mounded, a small rectangle, almost 2 meters, sloppily raised, a carelessly hidden scar. Someone, once, had done this in haste. Rachel approached. There was no fear now, just cold certainty. She knew what she would find, she just didn't know how it would feel. She knelt by the mound, placed the light nearby to flood the spot, stared for a long time. This was journey's end. This was the answer. She reached out with trembling fingers and brushed away the loose dirt. Cold, wet, she dug, stripped of all tools but her hands. Wet soil packed under her nails, smeared her skin. The action was eerily familiar, like those scattered dreams. She worked automatically, there was no thought, only action, only the need to see. The first layer went, then the second. She dug deeper. The scent of decomposition swelled, sickened her, but she did not halt. At last, her fingers struck something, not stone, not wood, something soft, yielding, cloth, decayed. She stopped breathing. Hesitantly, she uncovered the edges of the object. Bit by bit it emerged in the light. A human hand, 5 fingers, unnaturally pale, clenched as if forever grasping. Skin so fragile it was almost translucent. Blue veins like bruises. Rachel collapsed to her knees, gasping, stared at the hand. One part of her wanted to flee, to reject the horror, but she couldn't. Her eyes fixed on a detail, on the ring finger, a simple silver ring, banded in an etched twist. Rachel's heart froze. Automaton. She raised her own left hand, shone the flashlight, placed it beside the corpse's. On her ring finger, a simple silver ring, with the same twist, glimmering malevolently. No, the shout ripped out, not in terror, but recognition. The cry of a soul recognizing its own grave. And in that moment, the last dam of memory broke. No more fragments. No more unattended sensations. Now, a movie, vivid, horrifying, unspooling in her mind. She was at the construction site. Headlights. A man's promising voice. The trap. Something heavy striking the back of her skull. Bright pain. Collapsing. Dragged. Heels scraping gravel. Dumped into a shallow pit. Alive but paralyzed. She heard shovels. Felt the first cold layer on her feet, her chest, her face. Panic surging as the air thinned. She tried to claw free, but her hands were weak. Darkness fell. The final, excruciating thought, I don't want to die. And memory did not stop at death. She drifted in a void. Conscious. Bodiless. Floating above her own grave. Watching her killers bury her. Erase evidence. Walk away. Trapped there, a soul shackled to her place of death. She watched bulldozers flatten the ground. Watched them lay the foundation. Watched the house built atop her prison. She waited for 5 years. Until one day, she felt something familiar, a part of herself. An empty vessel. A body brought back to this place. And she began to call, by breath. Handprint. Sound, desperate. Always hoping to guide herself back to the truth. It was all clear. The breathing at the door, her last suffocating breath. The handprints, her hands clawing upward through the dirt. The vibrations, the failing pulse of her heart before it finally stopped. Rachel knelt there in the darkness. Tears warm on her cheeks. She did not weep for her death. She wept for a stolen life, for 5 years lived in oblivion. She stared at her makeshift grave. Two halves of a broken soul. At last reunited. And then, something both terrible and wondrous happened. The raspy breath she had always heard was no longer behind a door. It was in her chest. She drew in breath and heard it. Harsh. But it was no longer weak. It was strong. It belonged to her. The house's silence was no longer waiting, it was completion. Fear had vanished. Doubt evaporated. One thing remained, a cold, pure clarity, and an ember of rage. Deep and searing as magma. She knew who she was. She knew what had happened. She knew who had done it. Rachel stood slowly. She did not fill her grave. She left it open, a wound. An accusation. She picked up her flashlight. She turned her back on her buried past and began to climb toward the light. Step by purposeful step. She rose from the depths. Her feet did not falter. They were strong. Steady. She emerged into the hall. The house was silent. But now, it belonged to her. Entirely. She was no longer Rachel, the amnesiac. She was no longer Rachel, the trapped ghost. She was both, and she had work to do. What would you do if one morning you woke to find a one-eyed doll under your pillow, and brick dust on your feet? Though you'd never set foot in the basement? Do we really remember everything we've lived through? Or are we surviving on pieces left by others? If you've ever forgotten a piece of your past, be careful, because sometimes the past remembers you. Thank you for joining Whisper Horror Channel for this strange tale. If you're still breathing, still awake, and still believe this is all just imagination, like the video, leave a comment, and don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the next story, where we don't retell what happened, but what's still happening. See you at 3 a.m.